He stood over her, his shadow swallowing the last of the light in their minimalist, loveless apartment. "You're a ghost, Rosalie," he'd whispered, his voice a silken blade. "A beautiful, empty frame. You'll never be enough for anyone, especially not for yourself." Those words became the bars of her cage. For 2 years after the divorce, she lived as that ghost, haunted by his verdict. But what Gregory Sterling never accounted for was that sometimes a man doesn't see an empty frame. He sees the masterpiece waiting within. And that man was Alexander Thorne, a billionaire who didn't just see her, he saw the world she could build, and he decided he wouldn't just give her a key. He'd give her the entire kingdom. The finality of it wasn't in the judge's decree or the sharp, sterile signature of Gregory Sterling on the last page of the divorce settlement. It was in the silence. The deafening, cavernous silence of her new apartment in a walk-up in Brooklyn's less fashionable quarter, a place where the walls were thin enough to hear her neighbors' arguments, their laughter, their lives. It was a stark symphony of everything she now lacked. The life she'd shared with Greg in their sprawling Upper East Side penthouse had also been silent, but it was a curated, oppressive quiet, punctuated only by the soft click of his designer shoes on marble floors and the even softer, more cutting cadence of his critiques. Rosalie Vance. No, she was Rosalie Vance again now. Not Sterling sank onto a lumpy second-hand sofa, the cardboard box labeled Kitchen, Misk, slumping defeated at her feet. She was 29 and it felt like 100. Greg's final words to her, uttered with a dismissive wave of his hand as she left their home for the last time, played on a merciless loop in her mind. "Go on, try to make it on your own. You'll be back. This pathetic art hobby of yours won't pay the bills. You'll never be enough without me." His voice was a phantom limb, an ache where a part of her used to be. For 7 years he had been the architect of her world, and he had built it with walls of doubt. She'd met him in her final year at Parsons School of Design, a whirlwind of ambition and charm. He was a business student from Columbia, and he'd been captivated by her talent, or so she thought. He'd called her his muse. But over time the praise had curdled into control. Her sketchbooks, once filled with bold architectural designs and vibrant interior concepts, began to gather dust. "That's nice, Rosie," he'd say, glancing at a detailed blueprint she'd spent a week perfecting. "But a bit derivative, don't you think the lines are weak?" He'd guide her hand, his touch not gentle but corrective, morphing her vision into something blander, more commercial, something his. Soon she stopped showing him. Then she stopped drawing altogether. He filled the void her passion left behind with his own soaring career in real estate development. He was Gregory Sterling of Sterling Designs, a name that glittered in the pages of Forbes and Architectural Digest. She became Mrs. Sterling, an elegant, quiet accessory who organized his dinner parties and smiled vacantly at his jokes. Now, in the gritty reality of her new life, she worked as a barista at a generic coffee chain, The Daily Grind. The smell of burnt coffee clung to her clothes and hair, a constant acrid reminder of her descent. Her hands, once steady enough to draw the most intricate designs, now trembled as she handed out lukewarm lattes. The customers looked through her, just another part of the city's machinery. She was a ghost, just as he'd said. One Tuesday afternoon, drenched from a sudden downpour, she was scrubbing a stubborn milk stain from the counter when a voice cut through the noise. "You know you have the hands of an artist." Rosalie looked up. An elderly woman with kind, crinkled eyes was smiling at her. I'm sorry." "Your hands?" the woman repeated, gesturing with her own frail, liver-spotted ones. Long, elegant fingers, made for creating beauty, not for wiping up spills. The casual observation struck a chord so deep within Rosalie, it resonated with pain. That night she didn't eat. She rummaged through a box labeled Studio. Her fingers coated in a fine layer of dust. Beneath old textbooks and dried-up paint tubes, she found it a worn leather-bound sketchbook. She opened it, the spine cracking in protest. The pages were filled with her old self, bold, confident lines. fantastical buildings that defied gravity, rooms that were poems written in color and light. A tear splashed onto a drawing of a cantilevered glass house perched on a cliffside, blurring the ink. It wasn't just a book. It was a eulogy for the woman she had been. Greg hadn't just divorced her. He had dismantled her piece by piece until all that was left was the echo of his voice telling her she was nothing. She slammed the book shut, a surge of something hot and unfamiliar anger eclipsing the cold dread. On Saturday, she did something she hadn't done in years. She put on the one decent dress she owned, a simple navy sheath, and took the subway to Soho. She walked past the high-end boutiques and trendy restaurants. Her destination, a small, unassuming gallery tucked away on a cobblestone street. The Asher Gallery. She used to love these places. The quiet reverence, the way a single canvas could hold an entire universe. She needed to remember what it felt like to see beauty without a price tag, without a critique attached. Pushing open the heavy glass door, she stepped inside, leaving the gray, indifferent city behind, and entering a world of color, hoping to find a single spark to reignite the dying embers of her soul. The Asher Gallery was an oasis of white walls and polished concrete floors. The silence here was different from the one in her apartment. It was a contemplative quiet filled with unspoken conversations between art and observer. Rosalie drifted through the space, feeling the tight knot in her chest slowly begin to loosen. She let the art wash over her, abstract sculptures, challenging installations, and large-scale oil paintings. It was in front of one of these that she stopped, utterly transfixed. The painting, titled Urban Bloom, was a massive canvas depicting a single luminous white flower pushing its way through a crack in a dark, oppressive cityscape. It was a study in contrast, fragility and strength, darkness and light, decay and hope. The brush strokes were raw and emotional, thick with impasto, yet the flower itself was rendered with an almost photorealistic delicacy. Rosalie found herself leaning closer, her breath fogging a tiny patch of the air. She wasn't just looking at a painting, she was seeing her own story. The artist used a bismuth-based white for the petals, a deep, calm voice said from beside her. It gives it that unique, pearlescent luminosity you can't get from titanium or zinc. Startled, Rosalie turned. Standing next to her was a man who seemed as meticulously crafted as the art surrounding them. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal bespoke suit that fit him perfectly with no tie, the top button of his crisp white shirt undone. His hair was dark with a hint of silver at the temples, and his eyes were a startling shade of gray, intelligent and unnervingly perceptive. He wasn't looking at her with the polite disinterest of a fellow gallery-goer. He was watching her as if she were the most interesting thing in the room. Most people just comment on the price. He continued, a faint, wry smile touching his lips as he gestured to the small placard. It listed a price that could have bought her entire apartment building. You were looking at how it was made. Rosalie felt a blush creep up her neck. She was suddenly hyper-aware of her simple dress, her worn-out flats. I used to paint, she stammered the words, feeling foreign and untrue. It's just, the technique is incredible. The way the light is captured. It's not just hopeful, it's defiant. His smile widened, reaching his eyes. Defiant. I like that. That's precisely the word. He extended a hand. Alexander Thorne. The name registered with a jolt. Alexander Thorne wasn't just a patron of the arts. He practically was the New York art scene. A tech billionaire who had diversified into real estate, philanthropy, and most famously art collection. He owned this gallery and dozens of others. He was a legend, a figure as remote and untouchable as the moon. She placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was firm and warm. Rosalie Vance. She used her maiden name without a second thought. It felt right. A pleasure, Rosalie Vance, he said, his gaze lingering on her for a moment too long. Tell me, what else do you see? For the next 20 minutes they stood before the painting and talked. Or rather, she talked, and he listened. Prodded by his insightful questions, Rosalie found herself speaking with a passion she thought had been extinguished forever. She spoke of the artist's use of chiaroscuro to represent emotional turmoil The aggressive texture of the concrete contrasted with the ethereal smoothness of the flower. The tiny, almost hidden drop of red on one petal, like a single wound that proved the struggle was real. She was so lost in the conversation that she didn't notice the gallery had begun to empty, or that the curator was hovering nervously a few feet away. When she finally paused, catching her breath, she felt a mortifying wave of self-consciousness. "I'm so sorry," she said, her face flushing again. "I've been rambling. You must think I'm brilliant," he finished for her, his expression utterly serious. "I think you have a more intuitive understanding of art than half the critics on my payroll." The compliment was so direct, so sincere, that it left her speechless. It was the antithesis of everything Greg had ever told her. Greg had called her opinions uninformed, her taste pedestrian. Alexander Thorne was calling her brilliant. Overwhelmed, her old insecurities rushed back in. She felt like a fraud, a barista in a borrowed dress playing pretend. She had to get out. "Thank you," she said abruptly, taking a step back. "It was a pleasure to meet you. I have to go." Before he could respond, she turned and all but fled from the gallery, her heart pounding in her ears. She didn't look back, didn't see the look of profound intrigue on Alexander Thorne's face as he watched her disappear into the crowd. He turned to his gallery director, a man named Robert. "Find out everything you can about Rosalie Vance," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "The woman in the navy dress. I have a feeling she's exactly what I've been looking for." The encounter with Alexander Thorne left Rosalie in a state of agitated confusion. One moment she was soaring on the memory of his praise. The next she was plummeting, convinced she had made a fool of herself. The brief flash of her old self, confident, articulate, passionate, felt like a dream. Reality was the hiss of the espresso machine and the ache in her feet. She tried to dismiss the meeting as a fluke, a brief surreal interlude in her monotonous life. But the memory of his focused gray eyes refused to fade. 2 weeks later, the past came crashing back with the force of a wrecking ball. She was leaving work, pulling her thin coat tighter against the biting November wind, when a sleek black Bentley glided to a stop at the curb. The passenger window lowered, and there he was, Gregory Sterling. He looked just as he always had, immaculate in a custom-tailored suit, his blonde hair perfectly coiffed, a look of bored ownership on his handsome face. "Get in." "Rosie," he said. It wasn't a request. Her blood ran cold. "What are you doing here, Greg? I heard you were working in a coffee shop." "I have to admit I didn't believe it. I wanted to see the wreckage for myself," he said, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Get in. We'll talk." She stood frozen on the sidewalk, the old familiar paralysis taking hold. A part of her wanted to run, but another, more broken part felt the magnetic pull of his authority. Defeated, she opened the door and slid into the plush leather seat. The interior smelled of expensive cologne and success, a scent she had once associated with home. Now it was suffocating. He drove in silence for several blocks before pulling over on a quiet, tree-lined street. "I'm worried about you." He began, his voice softening into the faux concern he was so masterful at deploying. "This isn't you. You're meant for better things." "For me?" "I'm fine, Greg," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Fine." He laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You look exhausted. You've lost weight." "Look, I know I was hard on you at the end. I was under a lot of pressure. I'm willing to help you. Help you get back on your feet." He reached over, stroking her hair. She flinched. His expression hardened instantly. "Don't be so dramatic. I'm offering you an olive branch. A small allowance, maybe connect you with some people. You can't survive out here alone. You're not built for it. You need me to take care of you." The mask was slipping. This was the real Greg, the one who saw her not as a person but as a possession that had wandered off. "I don't want your help," she said, finding a sliver of strength. "I want you to leave me alone." His eyes narrowed into icy slits. "You really think you have a choice? See? This is all you'll ever amount to. A bitter girl serving coffee, living in some hovel. I gave you the world and you threw it away. You'll come to your senses. You always do. He put the car in drive and dropped her unceremoniously at the corner of her street. She stumbled out of the car, his words ringing in her ears, reopening every wound she thought had begun to heal. That night, she didn't sleep. The ghost was back, and he was more real than ever. Meanwhile, across town in a penthouse office overlooking Central Park, Alexander Thorne reviewed a slim file. His head of security, a discreet and ruthlessly efficient man named Blake, had delivered it an hour earlier. Rosalie Vance. It contained her address, her place of work, and the painful details of her recent divorce from Gregory Sterling. It also contained a brief bio of her time at Parsons, noting her distinction as a promising talent in architectural design. Alexander closed the file, a thoughtful expression on his face. He wasn't a man who believed in fate, but the coincidences were piling up. He had a major philanthropic project in the works, a new wing for a children's hospital, and he needed someone with a unique vision to curate the art for the space. More than that, he was launching a charity auction to fund it, an event that would bring together the city's biggest names in art and real estate. He needed someone with an impeccable eye, someone who understood art not as an investment, but as a source of healing and defiance. He knew it was a risk. She was clearly in a vulnerable state, but he also remembered the fire in her eyes when she spoke about that painting. That was the woman he wanted to work with. He wouldn't approach her with a typical job offer. That would be too corporate, too intimidating. He needed a different angle. The next morning, Rosalie was at her usual corner table at a small independent coffee shop, a place she went on her days off to escape her own apartment, nursing a cup of tea and trying to sketch for the first time in weeks. Her hand felt clumsy, the lines shaky and uncertain. "Is this seat taken?" She looked up and her heart leaped into her throat. It was Alexander Thorne. He was dressed more casually today in dark jeans and a gray cashmere sweater, but he radiated the same quiet authority. "Mr. Thorne," she breathed, shocked. "Alexander, please," he said, sliding into the opposite chair without waiting for an invitation. "I was hoping I'd find you here." "How did you—" "My security chief is very good," he admitted with a disarming smile, sensing her alarm. "Please don't be concerned. I assure you my intentions are honorable. I haven't been able to stop thinking about our conversation at the gallery." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Rosalie, I have a proposition for you. I'm chairing a fundraiser for the new pediatric wing at Mount Sinai. I need someone to curate the art for the entire wing as well as for the benefit auction. Someone with a real human perspective. Someone who understands that art isn't just decoration. It's a lifeline. When I listened to you speak, I knew it had to be you." Rosalie was stunned into silence. Her curate, a major collection? It was preposterous. "Me? But I'm a barista. I don't have any experience." "You have taste," he interrupted gently. "You have insight, and you have passion. The rest can be learned. I'm not offering you a job out of pity. I'm offering you a role because I believe you are, without a doubt, the best person for it." She looked down at her shaking hands, then back at his steady, confident gaze. His belief in her was a tangible thing, a warmth spreading through her frozen core. Greg's voice was in her head, mocking her. "You'll fail. You're not good enough." But for the first time, another voice was louder. Alexander's. "Brilliant. The best person for it." Taking a deep breath, a breath that felt like the first clean air she'd had in years, she met his eyes. "Okay," she said, her voice small but clear. "Yes, I'll do it." Stepping into Alexander's world was like stepping onto another planet. Her first day was not at a sterile office, but at Thorne Industries headquarters, a gleaming skyscraper in Midtown that seemed to pierce the clouds. Rosalie, clad in a new but modest black blazer she'd bought with the last of her savings, felt her barista uniform clinging to her like a second skin. Alexander met her in the lobby, his presence an immediate balm to her frayed nerves. He didn't just hand her off to an assistant. He gave her a personal tour, his voice a low murmur, explaining the function of each department from tech innovation labs to global finance hubs. Her office was on the 50th floor, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panorama of the city. It was larger than her entire apartment. A sleek Mac computer sat on a vast oak desk, and a whiteboard was already filled with architectural plans for the new hospital wing. It was overwhelming and terrifying, but also exhilarating. Alexander didn't coddle her, but he did mentor her. He gave her autonomy, encouraging her to visit galleries, artists, studios, and private collections. He taught her the language of auctions, the art of negotiation, and the subtle politics of the philanthropic world. He introduced her to artists, critics, and collectors, always presenting her not as his assistant but as his lead curator, Rosalie Vance, an architectural designer with a uniquely perceptive eye. She threw herself into the work, her days a whirlwind of activity. She discovered that the creative spark within her wasn't dead, merely dormant. The confidence she'd lost began to return, not in a sudden rush, but in small, incremental steps. When she successfully negotiated the loan of a major sculpture from a notoriously difficult collector. When an emerging artist she championed was praised in the New York Times. When she saw her vision for the hospital wing, a space filled with art that was whimsical, inspiring, and soothing, begin to take shape on the blueprints. Her relationship with Alexander deepened, blurring the lines between professional and personal. They had late-night brainstorming sessions over takeout cartons of Thai food in her office, the city lights twinkling below them like a carpet of fallen stars. He learned about her past, not the details of Greg's cruelty, but the shadow of it that still lingered. He never pushed, but he listened, offering a quiet, unwavering support that was more healing than any therapy. She in turn learned about him. Alexander Thorne hadn't been born into wealth. He'd grown up in a working-class neighborhood in Queens, a scholarship kid who coded his way to a billion-dollar fortune. He understood what it felt like to be an outsider, to be judged and underestimated. This shared understanding forged a powerful bond between them. The inevitable test came at the pre-gala donor dinner, a glittering affair held at the Guggenheim. Rosalie wore a deep emerald gown that Alexander had insisted on buying for her, a gift he presented as a professional necessity. Walking into the rotunda on his arm, she felt the weight of hundreds of eyes. Whispers followed them like a trail of smoke. "That's her. The curator. I heard she was a coffee waitress a few months ago. Thorne's new project, I suppose. He does love a rags-to-riches story." The most pointed barbs came from a woman named Victoria Davenport, a striking but severe-looking real estate magnate whose family was old money. She saw Alexander as her peer and Rosalie as an inexplicable and insulting interloper. "Alexander, darling," Victoria purred, gliding over to them, her diamonds flashing. She appraised Rosalie with a dismissive glance. "I was so intrigued when I heard about your new protégé. Such a raw, unconventional choice. Very bold." Before Rosalie could shrink under the condescending tone, Alexander tightened his hand on the small of her back. "Rosalie is not my protégé, Victoria," he said, his voice cool and level. "She's my partner on this project. Her vision is what will make it a success. In fact, she was just telling me about her fascinating theory on the use of spatial psychology in healing environments. You being in real estate might learn something." He had not just defended her, he had elevated her, turning the insult back on Victoria with effortless grace. He spent the rest of the evening making sure Rosalie was at the center of every important conversation, showcasing her intelligence and expertise. She went home that night not feeling like an imposter, but like she belonged. Later that week, he invited her to dinner at his home, a stunning triplex penthouse that was surprisingly warm and personal, filled with books and art that he loved, not just pieces that were valuable. After dinner, they stood on his terrace. The city spread out before them. "You were incredible the other night," he said, his voice soft. "You were," she corrected. "Thank you, Alex." It was the first time she had used the shortened version of his name. He turned to face her, the breeze gently moving a strand of her hair. "I meant what I said, Rosalie. You have a vision that is rare and beautiful, and I—" He paused, his gray eyes searching hers. I find myself captivated by it, and by you." He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. When his lips met hers, it wasn't a kiss of passion and fire, but one of quiet reverence, a tender acknowledgement of the broken pieces, and a promise of something whole and new. It felt like coming home. But as Rosalie allowed herself to finally feel happy, a different kind of meeting was taking place across town. In a dimly lit exclusive bar, Victoria Davenport slid a folder across a polished table to Gregory Sterling. "I did some digging on your ex-wife, Victoria," said, a malicious smile on her face. "It seems she's become quite the Cinderella story. I, for one, don't buy it. And I have a vested interest in seeing Alexander Thorne taken down a peg. I thought you might feel the same." Greg picked up the folder, his eyes gleaming with a familiar predatory light. "Tell me everything you know." The attack, when it came, was insidious and perfectly timed. A week before the grand charity auction, an article appeared in a notorious online gossip column. The headline was salacious: "Billionaire's Barista Cinderella, a troubled past and a calculated climb." The piece, citing sources close to her ex-husband, painted a devastating picture of Rosalie. It depicted her as emotionally unstable, prone to fits of jealousy and delusion, a woman whose artistic aspirations were nothing more than childish fantasies. It twisted the narrative of their divorce, portraying Greg as the long-suffering husband who had finally been forced to leave for his own sanity. It heavily implied that she was a gold digger who had expertly targeted the city's most eligible and philanthropic billionaire. Rosalie read the article on her phone while riding the subway to work, the words blurring as tears stung her eyes. Every private vulnerability Greg had once used against her in their marriage was now laid bare for the world to see, distorted into a monstrous caricature. Her grief after her mother's death was reframed as prolonged histrionics. Her desire for a creative career was called a refusal to accept reality. When she arrived at the office, the atmosphere was palpably different. People avoided her gaze. Assistants whispered as she walked by. The warmth and respect she had earned felt like it had evaporated overnight. Even some of the board members on the hospital project looked at her with new suspicion during a morning meeting. The worst part was the insidious creep of self-doubt. The article was a lie, but it was built on a foundation of her deepest insecurities. What if they're right? What if I am just a fraud? Maybe Alex sees me as a project, a charity case, and one day he'll get bored and discard me just like Greg did. She tried to talk to Alexander, but he was in back-to-back crisis meetings dealing with a hostile takeover attempt on one of his international subsidiaries, a crisis she would later learn that was being secretly fueled by Victoria Davenport to distract him. He sent her texts full of reassurance and promises to deal with the disgusting lies as soon as he could. But in her fragile state, the physical distance felt like an emotional chasm. She pulled away, burying herself in the final arrangements for the auction, her interactions with him becoming brief and professional. She couldn't bear to see a flicker of doubt in his eyes. She started to believe she was a liability, that her presence was tarnishing his reputation. Greg's voice was louder than ever. "You ruin everything you touch." One evening, exhausted and heartbroken, she was packing up her office when she knocked over a stack of boxes from her old apartment that she still hadn't fully unpacked. A black external hard drive skittered across the floor. She picked it up, a wave of nostalgia washing over her. It was her old portfolio drive from her Parsons days, full of projects and dreams. She hadn't looked at it in years. On a whim, she plugged it into her computer. The drive whirred to life and folders popped up on the screen. Thesis project. Residential concepts. Urban renewal designs. She clicked on a folder named Sterling Proposal. She frowned, not remembering the name. The first file opened. It was a complete architectural and interior design proposal for a luxury high-rise condominium. The name of the project was The Sterling Tower. Her breath hitched. This was Greg's breakout project, the building that had launched his career and made him a star in the real estate world. She clicked through the files, a cold dread seeping into her bones. The blueprints, the 3D renderings, the material specifications, the unique cantilevered balconies she had spent a month perfecting. They were all there, her designs, her work, dated 2 years before Greg had ever broken ground. She remembered the time vividly. She had been working on it as a speculative project, pouring all her talent and energy into it. She'd been so proud. She had shown it to Greg, and he had been dismissive. "It's too ambitious, Rosie. The engineering is impractical, the aesthetic is niche." He had discouraged her so completely that she had abandoned it, believing him. But he hadn't thought it was impractical. He had seen its brilliance. He had waited, and then he had stolen it. He had stolen her soul's work and built his empire on top of it. Sterling Designs. The name wasn't in honor of him. It was a brand, a theft hidden in plain sight. The screen blurred. The gossip column, the whispers, his reappearance, it all clicked into place. He hadn't come back because he was worried about her. He had come back because she was stepping into the light, and he was terrified that her success would expose his foundational lie. He needed to discredit her, to paint her as unstable and delusional, so that if she ever remembered, if she ever found this proof, no one would believe her. The grief that had been weighing her down for days evaporated, replaced by a glacial, diamond-hard fury. He hadn't just told her she wasn't enough. He had actively ensured it, robbing her of her own accomplishments to fuel his. Her fear was gone. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a woman who had just found her weapon. She saved a copy of the files to a secure cloud server, then picked up her phone and called Alexander. "Alex," she said, her voice steady and clear for the first time in days. "Cancel your meetings. You need to see me now. I know how to end this." Alexander arrived at her office within the hour. The exhaustion was etched on his face, but his eyes were sharp and focused on her. He saw immediately that the fragile, wounded woman from the past few days was gone. In her place was someone radiating a formidable, dangerous calm. "What is it, Rosalie?" he asked, closing the door behind him. Without a word, she turned her computer screen towards him. She opened the files one by one. Her original time-stamped renderings from 2017. Then she opened a new browser window and pulled up the feature on Sterling Designs and Architectural Digest from 2019. She placed the images side by side. The elegant lobby with its signature suspended staircase, the tiered penthouse garden, the innovative use of recycled glass in the facade. It was all there. Identical. Alexander stared at the screen, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief, and finally to a cold, contained rage that was more terrifying than any outburst. "He stole it," he said, his voice a low growl. "That son of a bitch, he stole your entire career." Rosalie finally let out a shaky breath. She confessed everything then. The years of subtle belittling, the way he had systematically dismantled her confidence, her fear that Alexander would see her as damaged goods forever linked to this ugly lie. When she finished, he came around the desk and gently took her hands in his. They were ice cold, damaged. He said, his voice soft but intense. "Rosalie, do you have any idea how much strength it takes to survive that, to hold on to your light when someone is trying so hard to extinguish it? I don't see damage. I see a fighter." He paused, a strange, faraway look in his eyes. "There's something I've never told you. When I was a sophomore at MIT, struggling to keep my scholarship and trying to launch my first piece of software I was about to give up, I was broke. Then I won a small anonymous grant. It was called the Vance Innovators Grant. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was enough. It was the reason I didn't have to drop out. It was the foundation of everything I've built." Rosalie stared at him, stunned. "The Vance Foundation was my grandmother's," she whispered. "She started it to help young people with talent but no resources." Alexander nodded, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "Her legacy helped create mine. I feel like I've owed your family a debt for 20 years. Helping you reclaim what is rightfully yours isn't just about us, Rosalie. It's about justice. It's about honoring that legacy. The connection between them, already so deep, solidified into something unbreakable. They were no longer just two people in a relationship. They were partners in a war. "He can't be allowed to get away with this," she said, her voice hard. "He won't," Alexander promised. "My legal team is the best in the world. We can sue him into oblivion." "No." Rosalie said, a plan beginning to form in her mind, sharp and clear. "A lawsuit is quiet. It gets settled out of court. The story gets buried. He humiliated me publicly. I want to expose him publicly. He built his reputation on my work. I'm going to dismantle it in front of the very world he so desperately wants to impress." Her eyes drifted to the invitation sitting on her desk. The Vision and Design charity auction. The event she had poured her heart into. At the bottom of the invitation in elegant script were the words, "Honoring this year's man of vision, Mr. Gregory Sterling." "The auction," she said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "It's the perfect stage." The next 4 days were a blur of meticulous preparation. While Rosalie finalized the last details of the auction, looking every bit the composed curator, Alexander's team worked in the shadows. His lawyers prepared an airtight case for intellectual property theft. His tech division created a seamless presentation embedding her time-stamped files into a video format. His PR team quietly reached out to a trusted investigative journalist from the Wall Street Journal, giving her a tip that the year's most boring charity gala was about to become the story of the decade. Alexander arranged for a specific line of questioning to be fed to a friendly media personality who would be in the audience. Everything was a chess piece being moved into position for a checkmate. On the evening of the auction, Rosalie stood before the mirror in the suite Alexander had booked for her at the St. Regis. She was wearing a breathtaking gown of midnight blue silk, a stark contrast to the timid navy dress she'd worn to the gallery. Diamonds loaned from a jeweler and friend of Alexander's glittered at her throat. She looked powerful. She looked regal. She looked like the woman who had designed the Sterling Tower. Alexander came up behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. Their eyes met in the mirror. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. She took a deep breath, the woman from the coffee shop, a distant memory. "He told me I was a ghost," she said. "Tonight he's going to wish I was." The gala was being held in the Temple of Dender at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a spectacular setting of ancient stone and soaring glass. The air hummed with the conversations of New York's wealthiest and most powerful citizens. Rosalie moved through the crowd on Alexander's arm, a serene smile on her face, ignoring the curious stares and hushed whispers that still followed her. Victoria Davenport watched them from across the room, a triumphant smirk on her face, believing the gossip columns had done their work. She had no idea she was a guest at her own public execution. Gregory Sterling was in his element, holding court near the silent auction displays, accepting congratulations with practiced humility. When he saw Rosalie, his eyes flickered with contempt, but he masked it with a condescending smile. He approached them, oozing false charm. "Rosalie, you clean up nicely," he said, his gaze sweeping over her. "Alexander, you're a miracle worker. I always knew she had potential, if only she'd apply herself." Alexander's grip on Rosalie's arm tightened, but she laid a calming hand on his. She looked her ex-husband directly in the eye, her expression unreadable. "Enjoy your evening, Gregory. I have a feeling it's one you'll never forget." She walked away, leaving him looking momentarily confused. The auction itself was a resounding success. Rosalie's curated collection sparked a bidding war, raising millions for the hospital wing. After the final gavel fell, the chairman of the board took the stage to present the evening's main honor. And now the chairman boomed to present the Vision and Design Award to a man whose buildings have reshaped the New York skyline, a true innovator. Mr. Gregory Sterling. A wave of polite applause filled the room as Greg ascended the stage, looking smug and triumphant. He accepted the heavy crystal award and stepped up to the podium, launching into a polished speech about integrity, hard work, and the importance of a unique creative vision. He even had the audacity to thank his ex-wife Rosalie, who in her own way taught me the importance of pushing forward even when others don't understand your dream. He gave her a small, pitying smirk from the stage. After his speech, the host announced a brief Q&A. As planned, a media personality from a major network stood up. "Mr. Sterling, an incredible speech. I'd love to ask you about your breakout project, the Sterling Tower. Can you tell us about the moment of inspiration? The spark that led to its revolutionary design?" Greg beamed, ready for the softball question. "Of course. The vision came to me late one night. I was wrestling with how to integrate nature into a dense urban environment. But as he spoke, the massive screen behind him, which had been displaying the gala's logo, flickered. It changed to a split-screen view. On the right, the glossy professional photos of the Sterling Tower from Architectural Digest. And on the left, Rosalie's original design files. Her raw sketches, her detailed blueprints, her handwritten notes. At the bottom of her files, a digital timestamp was magnified for all to see, October 17, 2017. The crowd murmured, confused. Greg faltered, his words catching in his throat as he glanced behind him. His face went pale. Then Rosalie Vance stood up from her front row seat. A wireless microphone was discreetly passed to her. The spotlight found her, and the room fell into a stunned, absolute silence. The moment of inspiration, she began, her voice ringing out clear and steady, amplified throughout the great hall, happened in a small, sunlit studio in our old apartment. "The vision wasn't yours, Gregory. It was mine." She walked calmly toward the stage, her gaze locked on his. "For years, I was told my work was a pathetic hobby, that my lines were weak, that my ideas were impractical. I was told I would never be enough. It's a very effective way to crush someone's spirit. It's an even more effective way to steal their work." The screen shifted, showing more files, more irrefutable proof. An email she had sent to herself with the project attached, dated. A video file of her manipulating the 3D model on her own laptop. Sterling Designs was built on a lie, she declared, now standing at the foot of the stage, looking up at the man who had shrunk before her eyes. "It was built on my portfolio. My talent, my vision. You didn't just take my buildings, you took my voice. Well, I'm taking it back. Right here. Right now." The silence was broken by the sound of a single camera flash. Then another. The journalist from the Wall Street Journal was already typing furiously on her phone. Gregory stood frozen, his face a mask of horror and humiliation. Victoria Davenport was slipping out a side exit, her face ashen. Rosalie didn't need to say another word. She had won. She turned her back on him and walked back to her seat, sinking down next to Alexander, who took her hand and raised it to his lips, his eyes shining with pride and profound love. In the aftermath, Gregory Sterling's empire crumbled. Lawsuits, investigations, and public disgrace stripped him of his awards, his company, and his reputation. Rosalie, however, rose from the ashes. With a significant investment from Alexander, she launched Vance Design Studios. She didn't need his money, but she accepted his partnership. Her first commission was fittingly the interior of the new Mount Sinai Pediatric Wing. She became the most sought-after designer in the city, celebrated not just for her talent, but for her incredible story of resilience. Months later, Rosalie stood in the living room of the magnificent townhouse she now shared with Alexander, a space she had, of course, designed herself. It was filled with light art and warmth. She was at her drafting table, sketching a new idea, completely lost in her work. Alexander came in and stood watching her, not with the possessive gaze of a collector, but with the quiet reverence of a true admirer. She looked up and smiled, a genuine, untroubled smile that reached her eyes. He walked over, gently touching the page she was working on. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "I was just thinking," she mused, leaning back against him, about that day in the gallery. "You saw something in me that even I couldn't see anymore." He wrapped his arms around her, his chin resting on the top of her head. "Greg told you that you'd never be enough," he murmured into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "He was so wrong. You were never just enough, Rosalie. From the moment I saw you, you were always and will always be my everything." 1 year later, the autumn sunlight streamed through the immense glass atrium of the newly inaugurated Rosalie Vance Wing for Pediatric Care at Mount Sinai. The space was alive not with the sterile hush of a typical hospital, but with a gentle, vibrant energy. The walls weren't stark white. They were painted with sprawling, imaginative murals of enchanted forests and fantastical starscapes. Kinetic sculptures of birds and butterflies crafted by an artist Rosalie had championed turned slowly in the air currents, casting shifting patterns of light on the floor. It was a space designed not just for treatment, but for healing, for dreaming, for childhood. Rosalie stood at a podium addressing a crowd of donors, doctors, and journalists. She wore a tailored suit of cobalt blue, her hair pulled back in a chic, confident style. The timid barista was a ghost of a different kind now, a memory so faint it barely seemed real. She spoke with an easy eloquence, her passion for the project evident in every word. She didn't just talk about aesthetics. She spoke about the psychological impact of color on recovery rates, the importance of interactive art in reducing patient anxiety, and the fundamental belief that a healing environment was a human right, not a luxury. In the front row, Alexander Thorne watched her, his expression one of quiet, profound pride. He was not standing beside her at the podium, a deliberate choice they had made together. This was her triumph, her vision made manifest, and he was content to be her most ardent supporter in the audience. He saw the way the hospital's chief of medicine looked at her with deep respect, the way the once skeptical board members now hung on her every word. He saw the young reporter from the Wall Street Journal, the same one who had broken the story of Greg's downfall, now scribbling notes about Rosalie's innovative use of sustainable materials. After the speech, she was surrounded, not by gossip columnists, but by architects, philanthropists, and city officials, all eager to talk to the woman who was revolutionizing institutional design. A journalist managed to push through. "Ms. Vance, your rise has been meteoric. Looking back, do you have any comment on the man whose name was once synonymous with New York design?" Gregory Sterling. Rosalie's smile didn't falter. It was a question she had been asked before, and her answer was always the same. "I believe buildings like people should have a strong and honest foundation," she said calmly. "My focus is on the foundations I'm building now. The past is irrelevant." It was a dismissal so complete, so elegantly final, that it left no room for follow-up. She had not only taken back her work, she had taken back her narrative. Gregory Sterling was a closed chapter, a footnote in a book she was no longer reading. Later that evening, long after the last of the guests had departed, Rosalie and Alexander walked through the quieted wing. The setting sun cast long, golden rays through the atrium, and the space felt sacred. A nurse finishing her shift stopped them. "Ms. Vance," the woman said, her eyes shining, "I just wanted to say thank you. We had a little girl on this floor, Lily, who was terrified of getting her chemo treatments. Today we did it in the Starlight Room. She spent the whole time counting the constellations you painted on the ceiling. She didn't even cry." Rosalie's throat tightened with emotion. This was the real measure of her success. Not the magazine covers or the lucrative new contracts, but the quiet comfort of a single sick child. "Thank you for telling me," she whispered. After the nurse left, Alexander pulled Rosalie into his arms, holding her close. That he said softly into her hair is what it's all about. They stood in silence for a long time, simply holding each other, bathed in the twilight. The chaos of the past year, the public spectacle, the legal battles, the rebuilding had finally settled into this profound and peaceful reality. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She looked up at him, her face full of a serene happiness that seemed to radiate from within. "I was thinking about blueprints," she said. "For so long the only blueprint I had for my life was one someone else had drawn for me, one where the walls kept getting smaller. And then I thought I had no blueprint at all. I was just lost." She reached up and touched his face. Now it feels like we're drawing a new one together. One with no walls, just endless open space." He leaned down and kissed her, a slow, deep kiss full of shared history and future promise. It wasn't the desperate healing kiss of their early days, but the comfortable, certain kiss of partners who had built a life on a foundation of trust and mutual admiration. In that case, he murmured against her lips, pulling a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. I have a suggestion for our next project. She unfolded it. It was a deed. A beautiful, sprawling piece of land overlooking the ocean in Big Sur. On the bottom, in his familiar handwriting, was a simple note. For our home. Your design, our everything. Tears welled in Rosalie's eyes, but they were tears of pure joy. She looked from the deed to the beautiful life-affirming space around her, and finally to the man who saw her not as an empty frame, but as the architect of worlds. The ghost was finally gone, replaced by a woman who knew with unshakable certainty that she was more than enough. She was the creator, the builder, the visionary, and her greatest design was just beginning. If Rosalie's journey from the ashes of a toxic marriage to the pinnacle of success and love resonated with you, it's a powerful reminder that our worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. Her story is about reclaiming one's voice, fighting for one's truth, and finding a partner who doesn't just complete you, but champions the person you already are. Did her incredible comeback inspire you? Did her final triumphant moment make you cheer? If so, please let us know by hitting that like button. It truly helps our channel grow. Share this story with someone who might need to hear that they are and always have been enough. And most importantly, if you want more stories of strength, resilience, and ultimate triumph, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what we have coming next. Thank you for listening.